Welcome viewers, Dr. JWA. Yesterday in the Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion, somehow or other, the Jewish leader David Ossip was confronted by pro-Palestinian, what appears to be groups, counsel to bring in international issues that have nothing really to do directly with Australian national and domestic anti-Semitism concerns. When an immigrant becomes an Australian citizen, what should become their primary public identity? And we've got an issue now after this happened on the 4th of the 8th, 2026, where Australian citizenship seems to be optional within the justice system to be replaced by ANCESTRY, and that these people can be convicted on their ancestry, or there's a hint of that. You'll be responsible for what's happening in your nation of origin. Most people assume the answer's obvious, yet the answer quietly determines whether Australia is truly a nation of equal citizenship or a collection of imported histories. Because if it's a collection of imported histories, as was suggested in the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion on the 4th of August 2026, then we cannot stand there and say, the Prime Minister of Australia cannot say that diversity is our strength, because it's absolutely not. If people are judged on their, let's say, if they can be targeted for what their nation's doing in way of being terrorised. Every nation faces a constitutional choice that is rarely spoken aloud. Does immigration merely relocate people geographically, or does citizenship establish an entirely new civic relationship between the individual and the nation that receives them? And my transcript quietly presses this question. If an Australian citizen of Jewish heritage is expected to answer questions concerning the conduct of the Israeli government because of ancestral identity, what constitutional principle prevents the same expectation applying elsewhere across all immigrants within Australia? Could Australians of Palestine heritage become representatives of Hamas? It appears that that's the case in some of these pro-Palestinian rallies. Could Australia, but nobody's terrorising them. Could Australians of Russian heritage become answerable for Moscow? Could Australians of Chinese heritage become associated with Beijing? Could Australians of Ukraine heritage inherit responsibility for Kiev? Once ancestry becomes the pathway through which public responsibility is assigned, citizenship gradually begins losing its constitutional authority. And this is where yesterday in the Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism and Social Cohesion in Australia completely and utterly drifted and opened up this can of worms. The individual, if this is the case, no longer appears first as an Australian. They begin appearing as an extension of somewhere else. That transformation might sound subtle, but it rarely arrives through legislation. It emerges through assumptions. Questions quietly become expectations. Expectations quietly become institutional practice. The issue therefore reaches beyond one community. It concerns the constitutional promise made, excuse me, viewers, made to every immigrant who becomes Australian. And that promise has traditionally been simple. Australia judges people according to their own conduct under Australian law. How the Royal Commission on Anti-Semitism drifted yesterday It actually does leave me speechless, because what we're trying to do is get a duty of care for Jewish people in Australia, despite these people with ideological terrorism pursuits. How this has been allowed to drift so far like this, as if to say, well, you're responsible for what your nation's doing, even though you're not a part of it. Can you understand how that's completely destroyed, in Australia, multiculturalism? It's completely undermined the whole essence of multiculturalism for that to have been allowed to happen. Because you can't just stand there and blame Germans for the Holocaust. You can't just blame China or Japan or whatever happened there for having to get a nuclear bomb dropped on them. You can't stand there and blame Vietnamese people for the war. I mean, this really, this is the way we're going to play the game now, is it? It is not of the Australian spirit. Where is these mindsets coming from? Australia judges people according to their own conduct under Australian law, not according to the governments they left behind. Is that right, viewers, or not? Somebody make a comment. Not according to wars they did not command, not according to conflicts unfolding beyond Australian sovereignty. Perhaps that is the deeper question left by my transcript. Does Australian citizenship replace ancestral political identity? Because apparently, yesterday in the Australian Royal Commission, that's not so. Fancy having to live in a foreign country with the fear of being pursued by the consequences of what your nation's doing on the other side of the world, or has done or will do. How can Iranians then feel safe in Australia? How can you see how this just spreads like a disease? It's not justifiable. Does Australian citizenship replace ancestral political identity? Or does ancestral political identity continue determining how Australian citizens are understood inside Australian institutions? And viewers, the answer may ultimately define not only the scope of one Royal Commission, this one particularly into anti-Semitism and social cohesion, but the meaning of the Australian citizenship itself. This has turned the whole meaning of Australian citizenship upside down, not only for the Jewish people, but from every immigrant that has a clear connection or a clear, visible, I'd say the Chinese. You can tell someone that's Chinese. It just opens up a whole can of worms for people being made responsible for what their country's doing, even though they've got nothing to do with it. This has got to be addressed.